All right, this piece of paper is Arches. It's a heavier, slightly heavier than the 140 pound. It's a 200 pound Arches paper. And I've got some hematite, which is one of the granulating Daniel Smith colors, and some burnt tiger's eye. And both of these paints are made out of ground crystals. I've been using them for about, at least 6-7 years now. Partly because as somebody who does some energy healing work, I love to use them and have this is the tiger's eye. It's more of a brown. They both are granulating. Some of the crystal paints don't granulate as much as these, so I've separated in 2 different packages the ones that granulate for me and the ones that don't. So what I want to do to start is to just I've put a little bit of Payne's gray here to indicate a bit of a hillside. And I've put some Naples yellow and some quinacridone yellow in here, and a slight amount of Payne's gray in here to have a sort of misty feel. I'm going to turn this paper upside down because I'm going to have an embankment here, and so I'm going to take some of this hematite. Let me see. I think I'm not going to use this big brush for that. That's a Kolinsky sable. This is a large Kolinsky sable, number 12. It's good for putting the water on, which is something I was just doing. Now I'm going to just slightly spray that dried paint, and I'm going to take I'm going to use my palette knife and just take a little bit of that because I want marks. Now, I want marks on that embankment rather than a smoother brush stroke. Now, another way to get those marks is to use any kind of card that you get, supermarket card, library card. These also work very nice. They give a slightly different mark than because they bend nicely. But I'm just going to put some marks here, and I should leave some spaces, but I want to put in some varying amounts of paint. I'm also going to put a little bit of this brown tiger's eye in here, so that there's some differences in the color. Okay. Now I'd already misted that very slightly on the dried paper. So the next thing I want to do is now I'll take one of those sable brushes and I'll drop some water down in specific places and let that water bleed a bit. So there should be a little bit more. And then my easel is tilted, as it often is, at about, I would say it's between 20 and 30 degrees. It's not a big tilt. If I want the paint to run a little more, I'll just lift it like this. But this gives me some movement, but not too much. So now I'm going to spray some of that paint. I use this and let that just move. Now when it gets down to the edge of the hillside, I may dab it, but for now I just want a small amount of so if I have a lot amount, it looks like it's going to run into the edge. I don't want that to happen. Okay, so I'm going to let that just do that for a little bit, and I may help it along here and there. I may take the brush over here and just let that be a little here and there. I might make some marks with the tip of the brush that can indicate some saplings or some small trees. But this is the far bank on the hillside, so I'm not going to do too much, just enough to make it feel that there's something happening here. I'll take a little bit of this water away. There are a number of wonderful granulating paints. I also like very much to use the Daniel Smith Luna paints, which have speckles of dark in them. They're not crystal based like these. One of the really good granulating ones by Daniel Smith that's a crystal is purpurite, and another one that's very effective is here it is, hematite. I think those are the ones that I have found to be the most granulating, along with zoisite. Zoisite is greenish, and so that can also be very helpful in landscaping if you want to get some of this beautiful granulation. So I'm just going to tilt a little higher now, and I'm going to pull it up so you can see what's happening. You can see it slowly granulates. And I can spray a little more, but I want to first give it a chance. So I'm just going to put a little bit of water in a few places that will give it a chance to run down and follow the trail of the water, taking the point of least resistance to flow with gravity. Dabbing, because I really want to keep my sky clear. And so I'll just do a bit more spray. It's a very fine mist with that Holbein sprayer. And I have a larger sprayer also, but it puts out bigger droplets. So depending on what you want, sometimes you want big droplets because sometimes you want to put in a solid background and wait till it has a sheen and then spray with some big droplets or splatter with some big droplets of water. And that will give you a very nice effect if you're patient and you wait till it has a sheen. So I'm just going to go and clean up these marks here, as if this is some kind of waterway here anyway. So there would be some marks anyway, but I just want to clean them up so that they're not too dramatic out in the waterway. Okay. I think this is beginning to look okay. Okay. Once I turn it around and later on I may add some more, but right now I want to leave it kind of with those jagged marks. The other thing that I was thinking I would do, I'll get I'm going to put into the brown, no, not into the brown, into the hematite. Now the plate isn't big enough. Let me see, I've got another plate. I need a big plate to do what I'm thinking of doing. got one right here right now. I took them all down to be cleaned. Okay. So I'm going to break one of these in half since the plate is too small. But I'm thinking that what I will do is put one of these wooden, I was going to put a whole wooden thing in the tiger's eye and do a couple of marks just again as part of this shoreline. And you know, what I like to do in these videos is just show you some process, not necessarily saying this is the way to, this is a great painting, but that here's a technique for working. Okay, so that was just one of these wooden things, stirrers or tongue depressors, as they used to be called back in the day. So I think that that's probably, now I've got a big chunk of paint here, and if I leave that and it gets wet, it will make a big mess on the painting later. So, because it's really a big chunk of paint. So I'll just dab it. It won't affect the underline, but it'll just take away the blob on top. Okay, so here's the hillside now. Okay, so the next thing I want to do is take one of these mop brushes. I think I'll go with this number 12 Kolinsky Sable, because it holds a lot of water, and just spread some water here like this. My idea is that this would be like a river. So I'm just going to put in a little bit of the Paynes gray, the same color that's up in the hillside, but just a little bit of that, because it's a bit, this is Paynes gray blue hue, so it's sometimes called Paynes gray blue, or sometimes it's called Paynes blue gray. Okay, so I'm just going to put a little bit of that in, and I'm going to spread it because I really want that diffused, just to indicate the sense of water. Not too much, just a little bit. And it has that nice bluish gray, the same color as what's in the hillside. But just a little bit here and there to give a sense of water. This is not going to be a very detailed painting. This is going to be a bit of a semi-abstract expressionist painting. Okay, good. So the next step that I want to do is to begin some of the embankment, and I want to take the same approach. I think this time I'm going to start with the tiger's eye and put some on this spatula or this palette knife that is vertically shaped, because I think that's going to give me some really nice longer marks. Okay, and so I'm just building in a sense of embankment here. And I do want this to have strong marks. And I'll put a little bit of the hematite in there in a few spots. Okay. And once again, I'm going to use this fine spray. I'm going to put a little more water in it. It's Sunday. It's Sunday. You can hear the motorcycles. I live on one of the scenic roads. I don't know whose bright idea it was to make this a scenic road. But anyway, because it is beautiful, but once it's on the map, every motorcyclist in the state knows how to get here. So see that granulation? Now I don't want it to go too far. So I don't want it to be too fast and too far, but I want it to slowly. So I'm going to pick the board up so that it slows down a little bit. Because I want this to be fairly subtle, but I can have some of it go down, but not too much, okay? I want that bank to be soft, because there are going to be stronger marks here in the just beyond that. So we'll put some, and I don't want that, and that's not going to go, it'll diffuse a little bit into the river, but not too much. Because I tried to put those marks just below the wet river mark, the wet water for the river, so that it wouldn't be too diffused into the river. Okay, so I'll leave that for now, but take a, I think what I'll do is take a rigger, and in this case, this is a number 4 Princeton rigger. It's got a nice synthetic edge. I'm just going to have, I have some of the color from the hematite. I probably shouldn't do that. Yeah, I shouldn't do that. I have to wait until everything is dry. Well, you know, this is, I should wait until everything is dry there, and then I'll come in and put some grasses. Okay. Meanwhile, I'll just fix that up a little bit. And just try to keep that edge. And put some grasses in after, and I'll spray over here so that, again, I'll spray downward. There. So that that drips down. Okay. The next step involves working down in this area. Okay. But I really need to wait for this to dry to do that. So I'll come back to you as soon as that's dry and show you how I'm going to put the trees into this foreground area. I'll be back shortly. I think while I'm waiting for that to dry, I think in the lower area, while I'm waiting for that to dry and before I can put the trees in and the shadows in, I'm just going to take I'm going to take the palette that I use when I don't need to use the two paints directly. And so when I just want to use my palette, that's colors that are on my palette, I'm going to take some yellow ochre. This is the yellow ochre, okay? And I want to put that yellow ochre a bit into this area here that is closest to the viewer. And I'm going to try to simulate some grasses. And I want this to be, it's very watery, deliberately. And part of that background will be, part of that foreground will be just white. But I just want to have some color as you get closer to the viewer, and begins to simulate grasses. Okay, so I'm just making the marks in a way with a flat brush. This is a number 14. Hard to see what it says. Anyway, it is a Kolinsky sable. It's a number 14. You can't really trust the numbers very well on some of these brushes because they all seem to be a 14 in one manufacturer won't look quite the same as a 14 in another, but in general it indicates it's a bigger. This is a big, pretty good size flat. But oftentimes they specify the flats by the dimension, so they would say this is a 1/2 inch flat. And that it's Kolinsky sable. That would be a key thing that they would want to say. The other thing we're going to do next to that is I'm going to put in a little bit of umber. This is the umber color on the palette. So I'm going to put a little bit of that umber and mix that a little bit with the ochre, just to make it slightly darker, but a fair amount of water. Okay, and I'm going to put again that and let that diffuse, but have those marks, big grass-like marks in this area down here. Okay. Just this helps to frame and repeat the. This is more or less a number of parallel marks as a design for the painting, with the hillside and the slope and the river and the embankment close by. So I'll put it a little bit darker over here. Okay. I think that'll be fine. I'm just putting a slight amount of damp water on some of these marks so that they don't have too sharp an edge and that they blend in. You can still begin to see some of the idea of the grasses, but make it a little more subtle with the damp brush. In fact, softening the edges. Okay. So once this all dries completely, then I'll be able to paint trees on this embankment. I think tall trees coming up and casting a shadow. And then we'll see whether this, once those trees are done, maybe some of this might need a little more definition, but I'm kind of liking, I'm liking how it's looking at this point. I might put some rocks and marks down here and maybe some over here. But for now, the plan is just to put in some dramatic trees in the foreground and a little bit of foliage, not very much. Let the trees kind of stand on their own as dramatic shapes. Okay, we'll come back to you when this is dry. While it's still drying, I put a little bit of transparent red oxide mixed with the red ochre in there to just bring a little bit more brightness to the grasses, and added some more of the same color that we'd used before with the umber. And now I just want to take some very light browns with the liner brush. You know, the umber will be fine on its own. The umber is like this color here. This is umber and that's burnt umber. So I think I'll use the burnt umber. It's just a very light brown. I just want to do a few marks of the grasses with the liner brush. This is a number 4 Princeton liner brush. Just to indicate that there are grasses here in the foreground, okay? It's a little hard to do it that way. I'm going to turn the canvas because the camera's in the way. It's hard to do the marks at the right angle. So just like that with the liner brush, okay? Here and there, not too much. Separating them, varying them here and there, making some cross and some straight. And then I think it's a good idea always to try to do some of the marks a little different color. So I'll go to a darker color, like this is the burnt umber here. I'm going to go to the Van Dyke brown. I'll show you what that color looks like. Van Dyke is the darkest brown, and it's really a nice dark brown. I could also go to a walnut, which is this one here. I use these John Pike palettes, and I always add colors, and then sometimes I'll write down what their color is. That's a little more of violet brown. I like it a lot. Maybe that would be a good one for this. I'll try them both and see how they look. So now that I've got, see, then when I'm done, I just wipe the color on the palette. So these colors stay on my palette all the time, and I just use them when I think I want to use them. See, I just need some darker marks here and there, and among the lighter marks. So this is the Van Dyke brown. Now some of the paper is still damp, so they might diffuse a little. I'll go with the walnut a little bit now. Add a little bit of that. It's got a nice color to it. I'll put it over. Since it's a brighter color, I'll put it more in the sun side. I'll put some over here too. They're probably not different enough in color to be that noticeable, but just in case, it's always good to have a little variety. I think that's probably enough to indicate grasses. I'll put a little bit down here, now that I can reach this part. And this is still too wet for me to add anything on that shore. It's still too wet from the river. I had put a little bit of bluish green in the river, and it's very damp. Okay, I think I might want a mark right here next to this red oxide. Yeah, just because it's a nice strong color contrast. Yeah. Okay, that's probably more than enough. I could put a few just in yellow ochre, the same color as that soft yellow here, but by putting them in with the same color but a little less water, you might get some nice. Yeah, that begins to show that there are background grasses in here a little bit better. Just make these marks a little shorter up in the area that is light yellow ochre. I think you can see how that has worked. I'll hold it up for you. It's pretty sweet, gentle grasses. Put a little bit of that yellow ochre over here also. It's the same color as what was put down, but it has less water in it. And I had sprayed the paper so to diffuse it a little bit. So this just overlays it with a little more definition here and there. I should not do too much. That's my problem always, is doing too much. Okay, we'll leave that to dry because this is really soaking wet in here, and so still not ready to, but it's coming up, and I'm almost reluctant to put some trees in, but it's a learning video, so let's put them in once this is dry. See you in a bit. Okay, it's not completely dry, but dry enough for me to try to do one tree and start with that and show you. And if that example works pretty well, I may do the other trees, some other trees off camera. So what I'm going to do is take some water, just plain water, on my mop brush. Well, this is a round, it's a Kolinsky Sable number 6. And I'm going to take it and decide I want my tree to start right about here. And it's going to have a little different bending shape and go up. Okay. And I'll take some water again and make it a little wider and have it fork. Okay, that's what I'm going to do is to start. And then I'm just going to take some of this hematite and drop it in. And hopefully it'll follow the water as the path of least resistance. I need a little bit more of that hematite on my palette, so put some more on the palette, on the plate. Because I do need it to be fairly concentrated for it to do its job of really making this tree. It'll granulate. See, it can be very dark. So I'm just going to let it go downhill. I can make this a little wider here. That's okay. And then just drop in that color and let it go downhill. Now I'm going to dab this at the bottom to make sure it doesn't go any further than where I want it to go. And meanwhile, I'm going to take some of that tiger's eye, which has a brownish tone, and put a little bit of that in there as well. Up it. Let's see, I might make that tree so that it has some white areas. Okay. It's not a birch tree, but just has some white areas. Most trees do have some light and some dark bark. Okay. So we give this a chance to, so it has some of the hematite and some of the tiger's eye. Both are very, very granulating colors made out of crystals. Tiger's eye is particularly beautiful crystal to wear. I have some earrings made out of tiger's eye. It's got wonderful striations and colors in it. So there we have a first tree. How about that? A little more dark over here, I think, and let some of that run down, just dabbing with some of the dark of hematite here and there. Good. So there's tree number 1. Okay. Now, in tree number 1, as I come down here, I'll want to have this connect to the ground. So I'll just indicate a little bit of a wider base and also a little bit more dark. I'm still using the hematite. I mean, you could do this also with any color, any sets of colors, but these pigments, I like them for the energy that they carry from the original crystal, and I like them also for the strong separation of the crystal powder from the paint media that's used to make the pigment. So there we have the beginning of a tree. And I think while we're at that, I'm just going to show you how I plan to create some shadow from the tree. And that's to just take some of this Paynes gray that I showed you before, that Paynes blue gray. See how bluish it is. So that's the best shadow color from my point of view. And for that, I'm just going to take it and make it strong around the base of the tree. Very strong around the base of the tree, on the shadow side of the tree. And carry down a feeling of shadow of the trunk. Go right over any grasses that are on the way. And but as it gets further away, of course, the grasses would change the shadow a little bit. So I don't have to necessarily carry it all the way down. So there it is. There's tree number 1. It's already gotten lighter there. So I'm just going to have to wait for it to dry to make the base of the tree darker in this area and the shadow darker. But that's a good start. And then the next thing with that, with the tree, I don't really want to have the granulation in the fine brushes, in the fine branches rather. So I'll just take that same Paynes gray and make some interesting marks with my liner. With the liner brush for branches. Okay, here and there. I could put a little bit of I could do some of that with brown, with the tiger's eye. Make them a little lighter. Make them a little lighter. Some of them a little darker. And some of the broken branches here and there, which I always have on these trees. And then some others coming out like this from a knob. And they're always reaching up. Okay. I love the stark look of the branches. So, and this could be like late fall with those kinds of grasses. So I might put a little bit of foliage on them, just a touch, but we'll see. I kind of like that broken branch there. This one I'll make more of a branch coming out. This looks like a good place to have another one. Small branch coming out. Not too dark. But down at the base of the branch, as it gets closer to the tree, where the branch takes off, a little bit more connection by making it a little darker there. So that's the way I would handle the trees. And at the base of trees, there's always some, there are always some saplings coming up. So I'm just going to show you how I would take the liner and indicate that. You don't see it in well-manicured lawns where they weed whack everything away. But in nature, there's always these saplings coming out of the roots of the trees next to the tree. It's like the mama and the baby trees. So I have to wait. This is very wet, but it needs to be made darker. But over here, this edge has been lost, so I think I'll just see if I can put it back in. And it seems to be coming back in if I use the liner right there. That blended into the background. I'll make this edge a little bit stronger too on the shadow side of the tree. So even though I've used hematite to get the granulation, I can still use any other paints in the palette along with the crystal paste paint. They're all watercolors that just have different bases for their pigment. But I love the way the crystal paints hold the energy of the stone, the original stone. And also, I'm able to get this a little darker here. That's good. It's still too wet for me to finish it, but it gives you a sense. So let me just put some marks in here for the tree there. There. Okay, that's one tree. I'm going to wait and let things dry and do some more trees. But basically, I'll do a little bit off camera and then I'll come back to you. Take care. Using the card, as I had shown you before, I made some, to paint the trees, I did exactly the same that I had shown you before. I took some water and put the water in a line, and then from the top, I dripped the paint in and let it run its own way. Of course, in some places you can see the background through. So now, while it's still very wet, I may need to just try to minimize some of those marks being evident through. And then I took the card and made some marks around the trees, and also with the brush, some strong marks. And then sprayed it and tilted it in the same direction as the grasses, so that the color would run in the direction of the grasses. In essence, to kind of like create a shadow in the direction of the grasses. So I'll just show you that in a second. I'm just putting a little more color on. And here I'll spray this little part here. And see, it's running in the direction that I want. And I'm just letting some of that color just spread out, blending with some of the grasses. Okay. And then what I'd like to do, I have some Luna Blue. Luna Blue is a special pigment made by Daniel Smith that is blue with some black particles in it. And I didn't like the Paynes Gray and the way the shadows looked for the Paynes Gray, so I'm just going to see how this does, the Luna Blue dipped into some of this area. So it's a slightly different color than the hematite, but I'm wanting more of a bluish shadow coming down and blending in with some of those grasses. To indicate shadow, because the shadows won't be exactly the same on grasses as they would be on a surface that was smooth. Okay, I think that worked out pretty well. I do have a very little tiny sapling here that I put in, and some other small thin ones put in with the tip of my paintbrush. And those were not done in rivulets of water, but like these that are smaller, but not as small as these very individual thin ones. Okay, but I used, I'm going to now just put a little more definition in some of these, on some of the sides of the trunks, but not completely. I don't want to outline them. But just here and there, a little more definition. And especially in the places where the background is showing through. And it's okay that the background is showing through, but just want to minimize that. And I'm just letting the trunks come down straight into the ground. They would tend to, this is a little bit of a tree that I put in on the side that is a broken tree, broken side of the tree. Okay. And then here, up here, I need this to be a bit more. I don't have enough color in this tree, so I just put some water and let the color drip in. Both the brown, which is the tiger's eye, and the hematite. So I do have a bigger tree over here, and I have a branch and a tree that forks here. Okay, so I think that the trees are essentially close to being done. A little more definition over here is needed on the side because of the colors showing through. So I'll just make the trees a little bit dark. I'm having trouble reaching it because of the camera, but I'm trying to stay out of the camera myself. Okay, so I think that these trees are close to being done, and we need a few saplings over here, some over here, because it would be normal for them to be there. So I want to make sure that we've got enough of those popping up. And a little irregularity is needed here and there. But I like the way that the cards are giving a nice sharp edges in places, and We can accentuate that in a few places, but they work well on stones in particular. I'm just going to stretch this out just a little tiny bit with the brown so it's a little lighter. Just bring that out and then spray there to soften that edge. There. I could also hold the spray out a little further, and then it won't be as strong. And just in the same way that I did right now, these are still, these colors are still needed to be tipped. You can see how I'm going to hold this up close. You see the little granulating dark speckles in this paint? This is Luna Blue by Daniel Smith. You see how nice that is? And so that's what's here. It's the paint separates. And so I'm going to put some more of that for shadows coming down. Just making them a little bit stronger. And I like the little bit of blue color in them. And I'll just let them do their thing. Hope for the best. But I think they're behaving pretty well right now. I just don't want to have a big blob of them, but so I'll try to just put enough color up near the tree line, and that it'll just go down into that spray area. And I can even just have some of this color up in the rocks, which is fine too, because it's a wonderful blue color to be in the rocks. Okay, the trees are just about done. And the only thing I'm really going, this is again the card that I use, it's a little old gift card. It was cut up. And the only thing left for me to do is to add some more of these little branches. I love the starkness of it, and I'm going to see if I can hold some of this up so you can see the wonderful texture. You wouldn't get that on hot press paper, on smooth hot press paper. You wouldn't get that texture. So you need to use the middle level paper, which is called it's not called rough, it's called knot. So it's not smooth and not, it's cold press knot, which means it's not smooth and it's not rough. So it's in between. Some people call it fine, but just so you know, this is the 200-pound Arches knot. Not smooth and not rough. I'm putting a little more Luna Blue. I'm going to bring a little bit of that down here onto this very big shadow here. Paper's very wet, but I think it'll work out. I had to scrub out the Paynes gray that I had put in there, so I'll just add some more grass color around that once it dries. But I think that basically this picture is done. I hope you enjoyed seeing the process. So I've put in some branches with the liner brush that I showed you before, and I'm going to take this Luna Blue that's on the plate, and I just went outside and took some pictures of my birch trees and how the leaves are clumped. So I'm going to put in some marks that indicate the same kind of clumping that you see here of the leaves, of the shapes. So I'm not wanting to do a lot of individual leaves or a lot of texture, because I really don't want to take away from the starkness of these wonderful trunks and everything. So I'm just going to use the flat and the Luna Blue to bring in some groupings of leaves. And then I have another brush that I'm going to bring in to do a little bit more. I can use the side and the point. I can use the flat. These flat brushes are extremely versatile. And then I'll take a little bit more color in some places and put that in. That it has less water, so that there's some variety in here. But I'm not going to do too much more than that. I like the idea that the flat brush kind of mirrors the card that I used below, making some sharp edges so that it's compatible with that in the sense of the harmony of the overall painting. So when I use a little bit more water like this, then I can come in with a little less water and add some other marks that are darker. All being done with this nice little brush. And I think I'll put this branch in front of that tree over there. So it shows that this tree here is got some branches in front of the other one. I'll put a few marks on this branch here. A few darker marks over here. Just a few little bits, not much with these other little branches. And then as we go further away in background, just some bigger clumps here and there. Not too much variation because it's just distracting. In the past, my tendency was to put in a lot of small marks, and I think it was it's better in many ways. But every artist is different. But it's better in many ways to just let it be a little less defined with a lot of little marks. So what I'm doing is providing on the underside of some of these clumps a sense of shadow away from the light. And so this is not bright green and it's not autumn colors. It's somewhere in between, so people can decide the season for themselves. We've got a few little bushes here, so I'll just put in a few tiny marks over here to indicate that there might be. And while I have that color, it's not a bad color to put in a few little grasses. And weeds that might stick up. Okay, so now this painting is done, I think. So with patience, you just wait, you look at it, and you wait for things to dry and go back in a little later. A little bit of texture over that sun. I'll just put a little bit of, they would be faded out by the bright sun. Just put a little bit of lightly tiny leaves out there on the edges there, while the masses are a little darker away from the light. Okay, I think that is the conclusion of this painting. I hope you enjoyed it. I'll come in a little closer so you can see some of those little leaves, how simple they are, and with the flat brush. Just different marks, and then some very light marks here in front of the sun to indicate that there are some leaves in the sun. And here the texture and the little marks here and there for some grasses and saplings. Look at that texture there. That's beautiful texture there. Wonderful. Going down into the grasses. Just a few lines in the grasses. Very, very happy how this turned out. Thank you for joining me. I hope you learned something and it makes you excited about trying some new things. Take care. Bye.